Howdy. In the last episode, I ended with saying I should be putting with my driver. I've done a bunch more development of the idea since then, and I'm going to summarise that in this episode. I won't be appearing in this video because I'm recovering from a bout of flu and I need to edit out all the coughing without being too concerned about continuity. The first thing I changed was the grip fitted to the driver, because with a normal grip my right hand was off the bottom. So I switched the normal driver grip out for this overlength putter grip and verified that that hadn't made my putting any worse. It did in fact make it considerably more comfortable. I mentioned that I had trouble controlling the speed with the driver head, so the next thing to try was making a crude replica of the driver head out of some other material which is less bouncy than the titanium driver head is. I chose to use PETG because it's stable for outdoors use in case I actually wanted to use it on a course, and I had some available. Here's that crude head. I fitted it to the driver shaft in place of the driver head and verified I could still aim with it, and indeed that the distance control had got easier. Then I wondered if it would help me with putting with the driver to make the bottom of the head flat so that it's kind of preset to the right angle that I was trying to achieve through aiming. And I also thought it'd be interesting to move the shaft to the middle of the club head to aim for it to be more zero torque. Here's that experimental club head. It actually doesn't work at all for me. The flat bottom is the thing that caused me the problems. As far as I could tell, I was basically duffing every putt with that. So I designed a new putt head that doesn't have the flat bottom, still has the driver curve type face and a tall face like the driver has, but it's a lot more putter-like appearance generally. I quite like it, and this head is as far as I decided I wanted to go with adapting my driver for several reasons, but the most obvious one is that I want my driver shaft to have a normal grip on it and be installed into the driver head so I can use it to drive the golf ball, and I can't use it as that and as a putter at the same time. I basically parked the project there for a couple of days. I decided I'd go to the driving range and work on hitting my irons, which really needed to happen as well. So the first half the bucket was pretty bad. Because of my experience with the putter, I was more conscious of my lower left area of my back, and I was feeling that it was complaining at me more than other parts of my body when I was hitting the full shots. So given that I had concluded from putting that there's a problem with that area of my back when I bend forward and put it into sort of tension, I thought, well, why would the same not be true in the full shot? So looking at the dynamics of how I swing, if I take a conventional stance and setup and then turn into the backswing, it's really stretching out that part of my back. Given we concluded I probably shouldn't do that, what can I do in my full swing to remove that from happening? So all I could think of to try was to essentially preload that part of my back in the opposite direction, so compress that area of my back at setup. So then as I turn into the backswing, I am still, relatively speaking, putting that area into tension compared to where it started, but I'm really just moving it from compression into a neutral state rather than from a neutral state into a tension state. I figured it should work to do this if I left my shoulders aligned with the target, rotated my hips though so that they're pointing way off to the right of the target, and to facilitate that I moved my right foot back, so again my feet are also aimed way off to the right. The obvious concern with that is that I'd end up hitting the ball straight right rather than hitting it where I was aiming. It actually only took me about 5 shots to get used to the new setup. It really was a dramatic difference. The first thing I noticed was I had regained control over how much I'm shallowing the club at the top of my backswing. The major problem I was having before was I was always shallowing it too much, which meant charitably you describe my typical shot as a draw and uncharitably you describe it as a hook. The second thing that I noticed was that my strike accuracy improved dramatically. Again, probably that's another effect of the same thing. If you've got better control of the club, you're going to hit the ball more where you intend to. And the third thing I noticed was I was hitting the ball a lot harder, meaning it was going further both over the ground and also up into much further up into the air, possibly too high actually with a lot of the clubs. Again, that could just be a consequence of improved control authority, meaning that I strike the ball in the middle of the club club face, meaning it goes further, but it felt like more of a difference than that. I think my normal shot with any given club was going further than my rare excellent shots with those clubs have ever gone before. So I think I gained some speed, possibly as a result of confidence and possibly as a result of, not trying to use muscles that I don't actually have. Obviously, I want almost all of those changes. I don't want the too high trajectory part, but I want everything else. And it also feels much more comfortable. So overall, much better. So I'm going to have to, I think, adopt this weird looking setup and run with it. And if I find out that my ball flight is problematically high with my current clubs and way I'm hitting the ball, then I have ways to deal with that in mind. Perhaps that pose would allow me to putt with a conventional putter without the discomfort I was finding with the conventional stance. The answer to that is a qualified yes. The qualification is that because of the preload I'm putting on my back, I'm less able to lean over as much as I previously was able to. In order to get my eyes above the ball and my hands in a comfortable position, I need a more upright lie angle on the putter to be comfortable. There's a limit in the rules of golf of 80 degrees. Most of my putters are set between 68 and 72 degrees. I have some wiggle room there. I think I can find something that's within the rules and comfortable for me, but I don't own a putter that's immediately suitable. Also, if I'm, making a wish list, I think the zero torque putter heads have merit. I think from my experience testing it with the driver that the arm lock technique of putting has definite value for me. And I also would like to play around with the visuals and alignment features on the putt heads to see what works best for me. So I fired up my various 3D modeling programs and made some printable prototypes just to see how hard it was to design a putter. The early ones are basically purely visual prototypes. They're useful to me to understand, if just looking at it, is this a vision of putter that I would feel like I can aim and be comfortable trying to aim. And I found actually there's quite a wide range of shapes that I could look at and be reasonably happy with. The problem with actually testing any of these though was that you'd have to glue a putter shaft into them, and then it's a pain in the neck to remove a glued in putter shaft from a 3D printed putter head. You're going to damage one or both of the plastic components there trying to undo the epoxy glue. The last one I've shown you here, which is a grey one with pink inserts, is my favourite of this phase of designs. And theoretically, if you were to take the grey part and get it made out of titanium and the pink parts there, get them made out of tungsten, then what you would have would be a zero torque putter head. It's clearly in the category of a blade putter as well, which I don't think has been done by anyone. And its moment of inertia is around 99% of what the upper limit in the rules of golf allows. So it would be in a statistical tie for most forgiving putter in the world. It would be zero torque and it would still look like a blade, and I think that would be pretty special. A lot of me is inclined to try and get this made. The second thing though to note about it, which is going to be relevant to some of the later prototypes, is I'll show you what happens if I just push the hosel and the face towards each other. It flexes a huge amount, and that's reflected in how this kind of putter would perform if you did use it as it is right now. You try and hit the ball with it, and a lot of the energy would go into flexing the face, and very little energy relatively goes into motivating the ball forward. So this would be a putter where you would be able to really precisely control it from 6 inches out to 3 feet, but probably wouldn't be able to hit it hard enough with a normal putter stroke to get it to travel 15 feet even on a fast green. I think that wouldn't be a problem if it were made of titanium, and turns out getting the titanium part made would be, relatively speaking, no problem because of selective laser sintering manufacturing. But I couldn't find anywhere that would make the tungsten inserts in the precise dimensions that they'd need to be. Having found out that getting the custom shaped tungsten was going to be nigh on impossible, I went looking for what are some standard shapes of tungsten weights that are out there that I can adapt to make properly weight distributed prototypes. And I found these tungsten cylinders that are designed for what they call Pinewood Derby racing, I think. And apparently you buy these, use a 3/8 inch drill bit and just shove some of these weights in the hole to get your model car up to the maximum weight that it's allowed to be, because that gives it an advantage in a gravity powered race series. Having got that stuff, I started to develop ideas for prototypes that could accept those weights and let me change the heads without having to glue a new head on every time. I shamelessly stole the driver attachment mechanism idea of splines and a screw through the center. I used that to glue on a hosel adapter to a proper golf shaft, and then I can screw on these various different heads in order to test them out. I'll show you a bunch of the prototypes now. Again, we've got a mix of different kinds of prototypes. So there's a half mallet one with a sort of nearly exact semicircle ball picker upper in the backside of it. This was just a visual prototype. It doesn't have the correct weighting or anything. Well, visual and to check the function of can it actually pick up a ball. I actually quite like the look of it. It, however, doesn't function as a ball picker. You would need to extend the wings out at least 5, maybe 10, 15 millimeters for it to be effective. And then I think it starts to look a bit too chonky for my taste. This one is a 4-piece. I thought I would try to design a system that would let me independently experiment with various parts of a putter. So I wanted to be able to change the strike face insert. I wanted to be able to change the overall shape of the chassis, and I wanted to be able to change how the hosel attaches so that I could, vary the lie angle and the lean angles without having to reprint the rest of the piece. It all attaches with M3 screws and heat set inserts. Assembling it works. Unfortunately, putting with it doesn't work, even with the correct weights loaded into it to make it feel about right. The amount of play in the insert and the flexibility in the material, and the fact that because it's made of multiple parts and attached, and there's always has to be a little bit of play between those components for it to be assemblable. All of that conspires to again mean when you try and strike something with this, you can't hit it hard enough to be a realistic putter, and that means as a test bed it's unfortunately useless. The current stage of prototyping is assembled from 2 symmetrical, well, nearly symmetrical pieces. That gives me a way to install the weights. It should attach to the hosel adapter with sufficient integrity. End game, if I get happy with one of those, is to work out a way of assembling it so that it doesn't have to be screwed together, meaning that I can have 2 symmetrical strike faces and it's ambidextrous, so I could use it either left or right handed, which is a feature I do want out of a putter. That's the current as printed set of prototypes, and you'll see I've got a solid green coloured one and a 2-colour, well, it's black, pink, black, but the colours could be anything. That's just something I'm trying out to see if I like it as an alignment mechanism. My hunch is that I won't enjoy it as an alignment mechanism, but you've got to try these things. Also, the black, pink, black is printed from PLA, which is not suitable as an outdoor material, but it is considerably stiffer than PETG. It's also considerably more brittle, but as a proxy for if I printed it out of a harder plastic, does that make it usable if the PETG one isn't usable? That's one of the things I'm testing with that, because if I'm going to use one that I've printed, I obviously need it to be printed out of something suitable for use outdoors and that's not going to degrade in UV light and yada yada yada. But there are plenty of materials that are like that are more rigid than PETG, and so I want to know if I should choose one of those over PETG or not, and this PLA model is a proxy for that. So in case it's not obvious, the aim when I started making all these prototypes was to work out for myself what's the head shape, what's the weight of the head, what are the important angles of loft, lie and lean angle for the putter I want to be using, and if at the end of that process I end up having printed a prototype that's viable in and of itself, then I'm done. I'll just carry on using that. I doubt I'm going to enter any competitions, so I don't think it will matter if it conforms to the rules of golf or not, although I will have designed it to conform to the rules of golf. It won't have been tested by any of the authorities, so it might not be safe for use in competition from that point of view. The more likely outcome I thought was that I'd get something that was kind of fairly satisfactory when 3D printed, but I'd have significant doubts about its longevity, stability. I might not be able to make it of a material that was perfect for the job, and then I would have to either buy a reel of some other material, learn how to print with that, and then make the head out of that, which is and remains an option. Or I could go looking for a putter head that already had all the characteristics I'm looking for and was commercially available, and just acquire one of those from the primary market or from second-hand market. Or, of course, if none of those things worked out, I could redesign it to be CNC milled rather than 3D printed and have a local machine shop fabricate it for me out of steel or brass or titanium or aluminium or whatever. whatever, there should be no problems with doing any of those things. To be clear, it wasn't initially an attempt to design the world's best putter or anything. It's just an exploration of what do I want out of a putter, and then we worry about how I find that for real once I know what the answer to that more fundamental question is. However, I've been thinking a lot about the physics of putting and what the ideal club for me and indeed for other people should look like, and I'm fairly sure if it existed I would have seen it, so I don't think it does, which means that we've lost one of our options there. Either I'll make a prototype that will do what I want, I'll have to remake it out of a more suitable material, or I'll have to get it machined for me, but I don't believe it will be possible to find it on the primary or secondary markets. I will do a future episode, probably the next episode, on all that physics that I've been thinking about, because I think it's mildly interesting, but this episode's long enough and I don't want to spend the time animating all of those. And if my health improves enough so I don't have to edit out coughing fits and whatever, the episode after that should be a live episode in which I'll design a putter head using the principles we talked about. Expect it to be more of a, if you're designing a putter head in SolidWorks, workflow tips for that, rather than necessarily here's me designing the one I'm actually going to make, because it always takes a lot more tweaking at the end of the process that I'm not going to sit around and do live. Thank you for listening and watching. This has been episode 24 of my hobby Quadcast. Cheerio.